Well, thank you all. Welcome to the Government Advances in Statistical Programming 2025 conference. We're excited about the many talks, workshops, and discussions that are in store for us over the next 4 days. Full disclosure, we're in the Eastern United States, so your time may vary. I'm Lisa Freehill. Until recently, I did analytics in the Office of Civil Rights and Equal Employment Opportunity at the Department of Energy. Before that, I was the senior statistician at the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And before that, I had an even longer checkered past in academia, nonprofits, and other government agencies.
And I'm Peter Meyer. I'm a research economist at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, working on productivity statistics. Long ago, I was a software engineer.
And so Peter and I have co-chaired this for 4 years now. We sort of went down memory lane and realized, my gosh, it has been quite some time. So I'm going to go over some rules of the road first. These are going to be the same each day. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you can access the detailed conference program, which will include the abstracts for all the presentations using that QR code. But I also put the link in the chat, and we'll do that a few more times during the day. A second thing is that the link that you use to get into the conference today is the same link that you will use each of the 4 days. However, there's different links for workshops and for the social hour this afternoon. You should have gotten emails about the workshop links if you registered for either of those. The social hour link we'll put in the chat about 3:15 when we go into the end of day announcements. The rules of the road are as attendees, you're all muted right now. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A box. The utility of that is that the speakers can then go into that Q&A box and also answer questions there. The chat, you won't be able to put things in the chat, but we'll be able to put things in the chat to share resources with you and such. Closed captioning has been enabled, so if you need that, you can turn it on. We are in U.S. Daylight Savings Time Eastern Time Zone, UTC -5. The sessions, the paper sessions, will have a variable number of papers, and each paper presenter will have 12 to 15 minutes each, depending on how much total time there is. And then the lightning talks will have 6 to 7 minutes each in their sessions. Session chairs will moderate the Q&A based on available time. If you have any problems, please contact both Peter and me. One or the other of us is surely to be available at some point.
GASP has been going for several years, sometimes annually, sometimes biennially. It's sponsored by the group now called Data Science for Federal Statistics, sponsored by the Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology. For Gov employees, there's information about DSFS if you might volunteer to join and participate in that group. In past years, GASP has grown over time. It had 40 to 45 presentations. This time we have over 60 with workshops and panels. NSF ran the Zoom for some years. Now the ASA does. In its first year, it was in person. Next slide. Next slide.
Sorry.
Yeah, we had a large program committee, a diverse one. Most people had done it in past years. We had and they're all listed in the program, so I won't list every name, but we have Gov and non-Gov people, and we had to evaluate many submissions. They were good, so we decided to stretch the conference. It now takes 4 days. And most of these folks are chairs of sessions. Back to you.
Thanks, Peter. And we really do need a community to help us to do the conference. So in addition to the planning committee, we also rely heavily on our govies and the Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology, especially the Data Science for Federal Statistics Interest Group that Ellen Galantucci chairs, and the American Statistical Association, and the absolute wizardry of Donna Lalonde, who has really, done, yeoman's work in terms of helping us to put together the materials for the conference, setting up the website so that people can access information and the registration process, and of course, the Zoom platform. Dr. Jun Yan approached us before the 2023 GASP conference and offered to let us do a special issue of the Journal of Data Science with papers presented at the conference. And so he has done that again with this one, and we will have the ability to do a special issue of the Journal of Data Science. It'll come out in July 2026 using papers from this conference. And for those of you who are presenting, you'll get information about that in the coming week. So each day, the agenda kind of looks like this, right? We'll have an agenda slide that gives you the load, sort of the rundown of what's going on for that day. So this is the rundown for today. This is in the program. And I'm going to jump right into our panel because I know that we're running a little bit late. The opening panel discussion will be Dr. Joseph Castle with Bayoán Calderón moderating. So take it away, Bayoán.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Glad that y'all were able to attend this conference. It's going to be a great one. And we'll kick off the conference with discussion about a lot of what Dr. Castle's experience has been within the federal government through more than a couple decades, as he has spearheaded many initiatives. He was at the White House, at GSA. He has been working, doing research, as well as building tools and other initiatives in the community and talking to people about this interesting topic. So I will just let Dr. Castle start with his introductions. And while we're doing that, we encourage everyone in the audience to use the Q&A channel to post questions, comments, and we'll address those as we go through them. So, Joe, please, the mic is yours.
All right, great, thank you. And I'll assume everyone can hear me just fine. I'm actually, it might be a little echoey. I'm coming to you from the Army and Navy Club in Washington, D.C. So I'm in a little book nook, if you will. I was thinking the last time I gave a keynote, I was telling the team yesterday, we were doing a little prep, but I was thinking about this. The last time I did a keynote, I was in Italy, I was in Rome, and I was a GSA employee, a federal employee, a career federal employee, and was asked to come and speak to the Italian government, all levels. It's kind of all one thing. They don't do it necessarily like federal, state, local, the same way that we do it. It's you're an administrator of the federal government, if you will, throughout the districts and the regions. And they asked me to talk about President Obama's, at the time, 2013 digital strategy and open source software, Code.gov. And it was a room full of folks, and it was a great event. Definitely in my career at GSA, kind of a once in a lifetime event. So as Bayoán said, yeah, happy to be here. Peter asked me to do this. We crossed paths back in the day when I was at GSA. I'll do a little bit of my background. I'll talk about Code.gov, and then I think we're going to dive into some more sort of tactical questions and what you could be doing with open source in the federal landscape today. So real fast, some of this was already said, so I won't do too much of it. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, served in the Army for a couple of years, then went off to school and went through grad school and PhD and all that good stuff. I was at GSA as a career public servant for 18 and a half years. And before that, I was in industry as a government contractor with the FAA. My background is software engineering. Started off as front-end development, so HTML, CSS, JavaScript, pretty vanilla JavaScript back then, to fast forward to Code.gov of doing DevOps engineering with React and Angular. And we had some Node on the back end to do some harvesting of JSON files. But when I was at GSA, I moved around in various offices in the CIO. And we had different CIO shops, and then we went through that sort of consolidated effort. I think a lot of agencies did that. But in 2013, I went to the White House and went to OMB and the US CIO office. And I actually went for a 4-month detail, and it turned into the White House Leadership Development Program, sort of precursor. So they have this sort of trial program running, and they asked me if I would stay for a year. So I did. While there, I worked on open data policy. So the M1313 had just come out. And I wrote the supplemental guidance, which basically told CIO staffs, we'd go around to different CIO staffs, we'd do the scorecard, we'd, trying to help them out, educate them a little bit on how to implement the M1313. So wrote that and then monitored that while I was there, and then came back to GSA and under the CTO, and OMB asked me to run Code.gov. So Code.gov back in the day was really the implementation of M1621. So it brings accountability of federal source code, but it also had the provision for open source software. So agencies were required to release 20% of their source code as open source software. It's a public good, taxpayer funded. We tended in the government to buy things over and over again, even in the same agency. And so, and this is for custom code. So, a lot of agencies would buy COTS and then do some customization around the COTS. And a lot of that code was not shared necessarily. So a little bit fast forward from that, went and worked with the agencies to do that. Actually wrote my PhD dissertation about that. So the policy implementation of M1621 had finished. And I think we might get into that a little bit. So I won't speak too much about that just yet, but had finished that and then went to industry to work for SAS Institute, SAS Institute based out of North Carolina. I'm in the DC area, but we have a Fed team up here, and did that for 2.5 years, largely business development, but some engineering, bringing the open source flavor to SAS as well to do more open source with package management and the open platform and all that good stuff. And now I have my own venture doing IT professional services, and actually do some veteran support. This morning I was over, for those in the DC area, I was over at Catholic University setting up a food drive for veterans that need food, basically, and some service members as well that can't afford to pay, have enough money for food sustainment in security. And so I was over there actually packing bags with watermelons and ears of corn and avocados. I was on the vegetables, I guess. And for those that are in the area, it is severely hot weather right now. So I came back drenched after 2 hours, but good event nonetheless, and happy to be here as well. And I'll stop there. I think we could go into the questions and tactical, but that's sort of my background.
Thank you. So you were at the front of a lot of the development of the federal strategy. Could you talk a little bit about the initial stages and the more recent policy or legislature statutes that have been implemented? Sure. Or the ones we should be paying attention to? Right.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. So M1621 came out in 2016. That was the federal source code policy. It's still technically in effect today. What went away was the open source software portion of that. So when that policy came out, it basically told agencies to do 3 things. It was each agency was to write their own source code policy. They were to update acquisition language to capture custom code by contract, which we started to create templates for that, and we would share that. And I hear people doing that even to today, which is great. So it sort of puts the vendor on notice from day one, like, hey, if you're going to do business with us, we're going to capture your code, or you have to write it in a certain way. And then I've even seen it written where it's you write it a certain way to get into a version, a GitHub or a GitLab or something. You're going to have to do it from the open source repository. And then the final one was the inventory your code, create a JSON file, put it at your root directory that then we could harvest to Code.gov. But of that code, 20% had to be open source software. So it had to be published as open source software. And so you had to provide us a link of where that was. So the open source portion went away. I talked about that a little bit. The policy is still in effect, so there's really no mandate until we'll get to the latest. But there's a new mandate. But for a while there really wasn't post 2019 to do open source software. So in 2020, I had left GSA, but the first thing that happened, which was pretty interesting, is I received a call from OMB from a person that was working on a new AI policy. So at the time it was M2410, which was it has since been rescinded, but they took some of the language even from it and put it into the new AI policy. But there's a provision in there that calls for open sourcing AI models, metadata, data, anything that you could put into a repository either through a DevOps pipeline or just kind of dump it out, if you will. Hopefully it's not just static, that it actually stays up to date. So that was in M2410 for open source. And then what came later was one day I received a phone call from or an email from a tech fellow who was working on the Hill. And he was working on a law for the Senate Technology Committee that would codify the M1621, but would include now the open source portion. So it's called the Share It Act. So share is in you're sharing something with someone. So share it, and it's an acronym, but it's the Share It Act, and it basically says that agencies now must, by law, they're mandated to publish open source software, and it doesn't give a provision on how much. It's just you'd have to go look at it for specific language, but that was signed by President Biden on December 24th, actually, of last year. So just got that in.
Before I continue, we got a question from an attendee. I guess it's a clarifying question on like M16, M1621, M24. Is it the memorandum for that? If you could expand a little bit of like the language or context for those.
Yeah, and it looks like Lisa. Thank you, Lisa, for posting those. It's interesting. I'll be honest. When I went to I was at GSA for a long time. I was in various IT shops and kind of working my way around to end up. Came in as a 13, left as a 15, that kind of stuff. But it's interesting because when I went to OMB, even my friends who were still at GSA were like, "Oh, I heard you went to OPM," or I went, they didn't even really understand. And I didn't know it either. I got to OMB and realized it was a policy shop, and I was a tactical person. I was project manager, program manager. I was like managing software development efforts for the government, requirements development, things like that. And so I get to OMB and I'm like, oh, I don't know did I make the right move? I'm not even sure what this policy stuff is and what this office actually does. The way it typically works for in the executive branch is MMOs come out from OMB. Typically, they are started with an executive order. So you'll see an EO that kind of more like the vision, if you will, and then the MMO will break it down further. If like agencies are supposed to do these things by these number, this number of days. GSA is usually responsible for a bigger portion. Those that have never worked in that space, like GSA and OMB, GSA actually does a lot of work for OMB. And they purposely keep the EOP small, the Executive Office of the President. They purposely keep that small, I think, for budget reasons, political reasons, that fight that goes back and forth over the budget. And so a lot of the work, like Office of Government-Wide Policy at GSA, I was actually, my last project when I left GSA, I was working on, they wanted to transition the Max.gov program, all of the technology. And so I was working on a sort of, we called it like government-wide collaboration. But we were basically going to take over Max.gov at GSA. So GSA does a lot for EOP and OMB specifically. So typically you have the executive order, then you have the MMO. You might get some supplemental guidance like M1313. M1621, we didn't do that. And then if you can really get to the next level, you can get to legislation. So if data.gov started because of M1313, and then I think it was like the Data Act or something. I don't know it exactly because it wasn't my swim lane per se, but basically it codified the M1313 and Data.gov, and that's why you have it today. It's through statute, and so it's still there. And so that's basically what Share did for Code.gov and open source. And
I would add that beyond the guidance, like part of the copyright law in the U.S. All the software that we create, right, when it's not copyrightable in the US because it's work by the federal government. So we release it as public domain. It's more how can we distribute it, how to make it searchable for other people to use in that regard. We got one question here.
Okay.
And I guess this relates to the experience at NORC. Basically, when there are contractors working with federal agencies and they're working together on a source code or like code base for some project, it seems like sometimes there's some issue on where to store the code, whether it should be outside or within the agency, and
Right.
who may have access and under what circumstances may be used. In your experience, did you encounter those issues, or did you figure out like a perfect solution that we can all employ?
Right.
I remember as working with like a DARPA project. We had our, computing, everything. We would run it in our clusters, and then we would share it with the folks over there, to mostly at national labs, for them to rerun it again, or like the national labs will take the code and run it themselves. Like they had different arrangements.
Right.
So can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. And it varies, right? It varies probably for organizational reasons, just comfort reasons. If you're a developer, what are you used to working with? If you're a data scientist, it might be different. I know being at SAS, even at SAS, it was a little bit different. Like I'm a VS Code, engineering pipeline, everything goes on GitHub. That I was a GitHub developer, so I'm just more comfortable with that environment. Not necessarily. I favor it because that's what I'm comfortable with. But there's, GitLab's a perfect option, and there might be some others. But internally, like at GSA, we would take a stance on my team's digital service and Code.gov and our software teams of like, okay, everything's going on GitHub, and we're going to do issues, and we're going to pull requests, and we're just going to manage. And we actually ran our systems off of GitHub. Now, when I say systems, it's like applications and websites. So it's kind of, it caters to that a little bit more. But I do know some people internally were just using Git in internal servers, so they weren't actually publishing the code. There's no open source component. So it really just varies on, capability, comfort, organizational standards, policies, things like that. My default is always go to GitHub, but that may not fly in some place. And I totally get it,
Definitely. We got another question, and this relates not just within the federal government or national, but you have also worked on international guidance or helping other governments learn from our experience, as well as sharing, like, could you talk a little bit about, like, you mentioned the Italian government, and we have talked before, and I believe maybe it's in your dissertation, you mentioned some of that, but how is it that it works in other countries, for example, like the Canadian experience or the European experience versus like the US, and what can we learn from those experiences as well?
Right. Yeah. A lot of collaboration and thought in international governments. I was in DC last night. I live about an hour north, but I was in DC last night, and I was met up with some friends, and one person who I hadn't met who was there was actually the person responsible for running Code.gov for the state of California. So they had their own version. I was like, oh my gosh, I just talked about that today. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow. International governments, when we were running Code.gov, I think the UK government was already doing something similar. Like they had started their digital service. I was never part of the digital service, but like that was sort of like their inroads when all that started with healthcare.gov. I had a team at GSA that we called digital service, but it was still separate from what USDS was. But anyway, as we were running Code.gov, we received contact, messages from other governments. So the Italians in particular were one, the French government, UK and Canada, and then some state governments too, New York and California. And a lot of it was like, hey, we want to start this kind of program. We see value in, economic society. We see value in doing this, just good development practice and what have you. Originally with the Italians in particular, we said, hey, if you're starting like day one, just fork fork Code.gov, just fork the repository and then take it and change it how you ever need to change it. I don't think they did that. They could have potentially taken pieces of it or forked it and used pieces or something. But they ended up basically setting up like very similar sites to what we had, and copied some of the policy language. Like we would talk on a regular basis of like, how do you handle this, like acquisition? How do you capture custom code when it's created or something? We'd be like, oh, we have a template for this or something. And then even in our repository, and it's still there on Code.gov on GitHub, the repository has like templates for contributing and licensing and things like that. So we would share that with the other government. So it was really just a lot of open collaboration, and to try and achieve the same outcome or similar outcomes with source code.
You mentioned Code.gov as an aggregator, and then basically the basis for each cabinet department reporting.
Right.
How can you talk a little bit about, since you're collecting all the data and presenting and distributing, like how was the compliance? Like, did it make a change in like the processes that agencies were maintaining? Were there some agencies that really did a great job at implementing that, getting to the 20% or as the maximum, like, because I imagine some agencies did better than others. Could you talk about a little bit of what were the drivers that allowed one agency or one department to excel in making the transition?
Sure. Yeah. And, the results are mixed. Big agencies, a lot of agencies. There's 24 CFO. We would always go by the CFO Act agencies. So there's 24 of them. Most of them are cabinet level. And then you get to the support agencies like the GSAs and NARAs and what have you. So in my dissertation, I encourage all of you to read the summary. read the summary. Don't read everything. There's actually one piece that I'm particularly proud of is in the literature review. I wrote a portion about the U.S. federal government and open source software. So it's sort of like a history of coming from World War II with Grace Hopper and sharing in academic forums and things like that. So I couldn't find any of that written anywhere. So it's a very short section because it's really trying to tie it through books and publications, and really trying to get that history tied together. But anyway, if you look in there, there's a chart or a table, I guess, in the back, and I took the federal agencies and split them by thirds, or split all 24 by a third. So it's like it was based on the amount of publishing that each agency did. So like the top the top eight agencies, that published the most, then published like kind of moderate, and then didn't really publish at all. So it was sort of a mixed bag. And over time it got better. We ended up getting more code repos. And I should say too, like if you look at Code.gov today, it's actually not there. Like it's a pointer to digital.gov to a discussion of it's like a one page web page of the policy. There is an attempt right now over at CMS to potentially reinvigorate Code.gov and bring it back. I even still get requests to this day, and I've been out of government now for almost 3 years, and I still get a request to this day about like, hey, we have some code that we want to publish on Code.gov, or at least, and so what I want to clarify there too is you don't actually publish it on Code.gov, you publish it where it lives. It could be a website, it could be GitHub, GitLab, wherever you're going to actually publish the code. And then with the JSON file, it's almost like Code.gov then becomes sort of like a library. It's a pointer to where the code resides. But it's sort of that one place, or it is that one place when it was in existence, that you could go as an individual, a citizen, a developer, whatever role you're playing, and you could go and then find government source code and potentially use it, to innovate, to save money and things like that. So I forgot about this until just now, but there's a quote in my dissertation as well from, I think it's Code for America. It might have been Jim Palka, but it basically said that for every time that a person uses a public, code, public repository, it saves them $100,000 in development, like startup costs, because now they are already starting with code that they have. So it's something that someone said that I cited. So it's in the research. I don't know how they measured it, how they came up with that, but there's the reuse. And so I would hope that that individuals would potentially save and be able to innovate a little bit faster, starting with something that someone else already created. But yeah, kind of a mixed bag. I think some of the factors, we talked about this a little bit briefly. Some of it's cultural, some of it's capability. So in some agencies, they just were not leaning towards open source. Like there's a cultural component. Some of it is a little bit of, I'll say, misunderstanding. Maybe that's the capability education component, where some folks still feel like open source is not safe. But if you're an open source developer, you tend to say it's actually safer because now it's, all bugs are shallow with 1,000 eyes, right? The idea is that, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but so it's been a while, but remember when I was still at GSA and OPM had an issue with Apache server and personnel records, it was like in the thousands, I believe. Personnel records were, a nation state actor basically accessed personnel records, and it was a backdoor effect. And the thought is if that code was open sourced, it could have potentially been found and fixed, and nothing happened. So open source developers tend to think that it's actually a little, or I'm generalizing, I tend to think it's actually a little safer, because one is you write it a certain way to be safer because you're going to make it public, but then two, now you have the benefit of the community, assuming that it's a good, healthy community that actually contributes.
Yeah, I think it's similar to Wikipedia, where you can have an
Right.
encyclopedia that was developed, but if there is an error, it's hard to fix and hard to spot, versus if it's in Wikipedia where a lot of people are, like, users are checking it as well as people using it. Everyone has a stake on making sure that it's with the right information. So people will go ahead and verify and fix it whenever the need arises. One question is, for agencies to be able to share and use code that other agencies have developed, or even within one agency, what were some of the best practices? I know right now we don't have like the full, I guess, website for everything together, but if people wanted, like, they could crawl it, or even within, like, go into one cabinet, say, I'm at Commerce, I'll check at Commerce One. That's the full registry of everything that has been compiled. And then I can go to each individual repository, take a look at it, and say, hey, this might help me, or this is a tool that I can use for this project.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of government agencies have organizations already on GitHub. That's one place. One place to look is also GitHub Government. They used to keep it running. I used to contribute to this a lot to try and keep it clean, but they kept like a running list in one of the JSON files in the code. So if you go look, go to the repo, go to the code, you'll find like there's different levels of government, or so, I forget how they broke it out. There were like basically like 3 files, and one of them was US federal government, and then you could see like the parent agent. I call everything an agency because I was at GSA, but parent, cabinet level agent, we'll just say agency. So like the DoD, the Justice, the whatever, and then under that you would see sort of the breakdown of what the repos were called, and then from that you could go to the those are basically organizations, I guess. So then from that you go from the organization to to see where the code resides. The other thing you can do is, open source is all about collaboration and community. So if you know of folks, or you find folks that are publishing in a government agency, reach out to them, right? Have that conversation. They live by the same policies and rules and laws that you do. Maybe not the rules, that could be a cultural thing, but in a lot of cases, it's really that reach out to each other and communicate and collaborate. I do know, real fast, I'll say this too. I have a friend that's over at USDA, still there, and he was working with Salesforce and ServiceNow, and he wanted to do something between the two of them. And there was some custom code that a friend of his had at Interior. And I don't know how he found this, but somehow they had a discussion and they had some code. They ended up just sending him the code files, like kind of like an inner source, right? Like just send him the code files directly. And then he implemented that, and it worked for what he was trying to do for his his two COTS programs of workflow and data transfer or whatever they were doing. But so really it was just that conversation. And then I told him, I said, there's actually Shared Act and you should just really publish that. And he goes, oh, that would have been really helpful. I could have just gone and found it. I didn't have to, call this person and try and figure all this out myself. But yeah, so it really just communicate and collaborate on code across government.
I think we might be past the days of exchanging floppy disk, like
Right.
things like from one university to the other. But
yeah, I'm thinking sharing the code was probably a zip file with some Python scripts or so. I don't know what it was written in, but some Py files or something.
So we got a question here. Do we have a link to the study of the use of GitHub by federal agencies? So I don't know if there is one study, but I do have a publication that goes into that. Yeah. So I'm happy to share it on the chat.
Yeah, and I would say, Professor, the thing I was referring to wasn't a study. It's just it used to be updated. I'm not sure if it is anymore, but
crowdsource.
It was just a crowdsourced listing.
Yeah,
of federal governments around the world, but really the federal ones were the ones that I would pay most attention to.
Yeah. And I believe NCSS also had under scientific and engineering indicators a list of basically repositories, contributors, and a few other statistics by I believe it was Cabinet and independent agency as well, probably from a couple of years back. So there are quite a few sources, but the GitHub, I think it's like government. We can put in the link as a resource later for the conference. Does have good information.
I think, one thing that's interesting about the international aspect and even the U.S. government aspect is I was at an event last week at the UN headquarters in New York City. So it was the UN Open Source Week. It was the third year in a row that they've done that, and they have international speakers come in. And what's exciting and interesting and exciting to me is really the fact that we're even having these kind of discussions. So this is awesome that we're having this discussion here. And then it's awesome too that because when we started Code.gov, I don't think there was another office. And maybe others were thinking about it right in their policy and working on it. We just didn't know yet, like the Italians or the French or what have you. But it sort of came through collaboration of us talking to them, and then they built their stuff, and it was really pretty cool. But the fact that now the UN sees value in what they try and do is it's not just open source for the code, but it's also the community, the collaboration, the economic value potentially. For those of you that know Frank Nagel, who's a professor at Harvard, he's written a paper about economic value. I gave that thing about the $100,000, but he actually wrote about all the code that's created, and we can have those debates as practitioners and theoretical PhDs and whatever. We can debate that, but there is. I feel like the world is seeing the value, and it's become this thing that we never imagined that would come. So I guess the closing of that really is just open source is here to stay. Now governments are getting on board in full force, even in some underdeveloped places is just ways to get started on government programs cheaper, faster, more innovative, that kind of stuff. So that's exciting for me.
We're running close to time, so if you do have final questions or any comments, now is the time. I'll do a last round just to collect maybe one last question before closing. I will mention that a lot within the national economic community and measurement community, a lot of the work, for example, the IMF does, especially with collaborations with countries that don't have advanced capabilities for national accounting, is to provide that software. Here's how, and then that can get you started, because then you can start adding your own, sharing with others, and building up that those tools. And it's definitely good in terms of putting my research hat. Open source also allows for a lot of reproducibility and transparency. You came up with an estimate. I would like to understand how exactly that came to be. So being able to inspect the code, use it, tweak it, does allow for more interaction of stakeholders, academia, and then we don't have to do everything because we have
Right.
more people help us. All right.
And I will say too that I don't know where this number. I guess I shouldn't say numbers given my background. But I've heard as much as 98% of organizations or 98% of code is like taken from somewhere else or something. There's some really high now. Like, and I don't. My default going in position, unless I'm like, I never build anything from scratch. I'll say, right. So I'm always looking for a program that does X, Y, Z. Let me run to GitHub and see if it's there or something. I was actually doing a DevOps pipeline, AI DevOps pipeline recently to match up to the M2410 for government agencies to use. And the first thing I did was went to GitHub and just ran a very broad search of like AI DevOps. I just wanted to see, like, has anyone built this thing yet? Is this a real thing? Am I just making stuff up at this point? And I didn't necessarily find that, but I did obviously find a lot of like AI open source, programs and what have you. So
definitely it's there. I believe the annual business survey, the ABS does have a question on use of technology, and it's right there, open source and open technologies. Right there is one of widely adopted. So I would like to thank Dr. Castle for coming and spending some time with us. And we appreciate that. If you have any other questions or if you have any comments, feel free to add it in the Q&A. We'll get to those, and I'll pass it up to the next session.
that's good. Thank you.